Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today, and thank you to Senator Melissa Agard and Senator Mary Felskowski for joining us to talk about marijuana legalization in Wisconsin. If we could just start off with each of you kind of introducing yourselves a little bit, let people know about your district and your time in the legislature, that would be great. We can start with you, Melissa.
Thanks, Jesse, and to the Cap Times for hosting the Ideas Festival and this conversation. I am Melissa Agard. I'm a state senator here in Wisconsin. I represent the 16th Senate District, which is parts of Dane County. It includes part of the city of Madison, Sun Prairie, Cottage Grove, McFarland, Monona, Fitchburg, and a bunch of townships sprawled around in there. And I have been honored to introduce and lead on a bill that would legalize cannabis for responsible adult usage in Wisconsin, I believe for 5 sessions now.
So I'm Senator Mary Felskowski. I came into the Assembly in 2013 and was in the Assembly for 4 terms, and then I moved over to the Senate. I represent the 12th Senate District, which, unlike Melissa, she has parts of Dane County. I have 12 and a half counties in northeastern Wisconsin. So a little different geographic size and area. I have actually been pushing to legalize medical marijuana in the state of Wisconsin now for 3 terms. I've been working on it, and we finally were able to have a hearing this year on the legalization of medical marijuana.
So clearly this is an issue that spans the state and all kinds of different geographic areas and different parts of the state. It's an issue that's important to a lot of different people. What drove each of you to take this up as a policy issue? And when did that start? What kind of got your gears going on forming this as as legislation?
So I can start out with that. When it comes to medical marijuana, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, and in 2014 I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Had a lot of side effects from the drugs that they had given me, and actually lived on opioids for about 9 months. And at the time, I was just like, all the side effects that come with the opioids, and then they put you on drugs to counteract the side effects and all these other things. And at the time, I had talked to my oncologist, and I said, should we have medical marijuana? And his answer to me is, Mary, it will work for some. It's not a miracle drug. It will not work for everyone, but it's another tool in the toolbox. And I guess it makes absolutely 0 sense to me where we have a natural product with a lot of the side effects that some of our more conventional opioids do, which we know are addictive and lead to prescription drug use and abuse. Why it is okay for someone to use an opioid prescribed by a doctor, but not a natural product without those side effects under a doctor's care. So it made no sense to me. And after having lived the opioid nightmare, I was very lucky not to become addicted, but I know a lot of people who do. And again, the side effects and lasting side effects that actually affect you for the rest of your life. When there's a natural product under a doctor's care that could do a lot of the same things for people with very debilitating and chronic conditions.
So I actually, when I was running for the Assembly, Mary and I came into the legislature at the same time, served the same amount of time in the state Assembly, and then swung over into the Senate together. So we're that many years old in our legislating experience. On days when it feels frustrating and confusing in the building, even after being here for almost 10 years, I'm reminded that 10 years in a person's life is a lot of learning and experience. And when I was first running for office, I was not running with the platform of I am going to be the champion of cannabis legalization in the state of Wisconsin. I frankly wasn't hearing about it that much at the doors as I was doing my campaigning. But then after my election, after I was elected into the Capitol building, I had so many people reaching out to me to share their stories about how the prohibition of cannabis in Wisconsin had harmed them. And they weren't just people from my district. They were people from across the state. Maybe it was the mom whose young adult child was driving on the interstate and was speeding, and they got stopped for speeding, and then they got in trouble because they had a blunt in their ashtray. They weren't using it; it was just there. And then they lost their housing and their college scholarships. cancer survivors like Mary, who were able to gain access to relief from using cannabis, mothers of kids with chronic diseases, um, entrepreneurs, people who had been born in Wisconsin and had gone to other states and had worked in the cannabis industry but wanted to come back to Wisconsin and bring that knowledge. People that had been harmed by the racial disparities in cannabis related offenses in the state of Wisconsin. I started digging in and doing research, and I realized it was a really comprehensive, holistic conversation that needed to happen when it came to cannabis prohibition in the state. And I dug in, talking to lawmakers in other states across our nation about their experiences with legalization. Now, remember, this was almost 10 years ago that I started on this journey. So the landscape looked very different than it does right now. But it was really clear from these conversations that Wisconsin was a less prosperous, less safe, um, and a state, as well as we were not honoring people's personal liberties and freedoms as well with our current laws. And I wanted to make sure that the people heard, knew that we were hearing their voices and putting together a comprehensive policy that was addressing the whole breadth of concerns that we had been hearing. And that was the birth of the very first bill that we had put out in the legislature. It has changed over the years based on what it is that we've seen work and not work within other states. Areas that folks have wanted to tighten up, and as well as areas that maybe people hadn't considered when they were first putting that legislation out. But I very much believe that the most dangerous thing about cannabis in Wisconsin is that it remains illegal. We are an island of prohibition now in the Midwest. When we first started having these conversations, it was more the coastal states that were legal, but now most Midwestern states also have marched down the path towards legalization. So it's certainly been a huge learning exercise, a lot of people to talk about. And also, there's a lot of fear when it comes to cannabis legalization. I imagine we'll talk about that as well. And we try to address those fears and concerns to make sure that Wisconsin can be the safest and most secure place for our kids, as well as on our roads and within our workplaces.
Obviously, even just between the two of you, there are different approaches to, different levels of legalization. There's decriminalization, there's medical marijuana, there's different levels of approaching medical marijuana, there's full legalization. Why, for each of you, do you believe that the route that you've taken and the legislation that you support is the right way to go for Wisconsin?
So I can answer that from my standpoint. Sometimes we have to do what is possible. And I think that medical marijuana, very tightly written in the state of Wisconsin, where, we control the growing of it, we control the sale of it, and then we defer to the medical society and to the doctors, to the medical world, as far as what conditions it's being utilized for. I think that is the possible route in the state of Wisconsin. And then whatever happens down the road happens. But we did it, when we wrote the bill, we looked at probably about 7 states that mirrored Wisconsin. They were either fully red states or they were purple states. And we looked at how did they structure their medical marijuana, and then based it off of that and the conditions off of that. After we had the bill written, and this is when I was back in the assembly, we sat down with what I would call our focus groups of other legislators. We walked them through the legislation. We heard their concerns, what they felt they could live with and what they felt that they could not live with that. We reached out to, around the employers piece of it, we reached out to WMC. There was like 7 different states that had workplace legislation that was fairly tight. And WMC gave us their nod on one of them, and we combined it so that it was, they're not a thumbs up on it, but they're neutral on it. Because we wanted to hear from employers. We didn't want any kind of liability to fall back on the employers, so that they were more comfortable with it. So if I was queen for the day, would I tell you that this would be the bill that I wrote? Probably not. But sometimes you have to start out with what you feel that you can get done, and then, we can always build on it going forward. And I really want to get it to the people, our veterans with PTSD, cancer patients, MS patients, people that have debilitating conditions, where they could benefit from a natural product without the side effects. And I think it's criminal that we don't allow it.
And Mary absolutely has been one of the more bold people on the other side of the aisle when it comes to cannabis policy in Wisconsin, and I really do appreciate her leadership and willingness to engage in this conversation. I, on the other hand, very much believe, and part of this might be majority party, minority party positions, quite frankly. But I, in my conversations with people all across the state and within other states, don't feel like we should have to pick winners and losers when it comes to cannabis reform. And too many folks that I have spoken with, whether they're farmers who want to be able to enter the ag industry with cannabis, whether they're people that have been harmed by racial disparities in the criminal justice system when it comes to our cannabis policies, whether it has to do with people who find medicinal relief from cannabis, whether it's entrepreneurs and business owners. I believe that we can create a comprehensive policy that doesn't depend on us picking who it is that is going to be able to benefit, and in fact allows everyone to be stronger in Wisconsin, allows Wisconsin to be a safer, more prosperous state. And it's no longer an experiment. We've had states who have legalized cannabis for over a decade now in our nation, and the ground has not fallen out. In fact, we're seeing the trend with legalization going in the direction of responsible adult usage in the similar way that we tax and regulate alcohol in our nation. And I very much believe that Wisconsin can continue to be a leader and invest in addressing racial disparities, supporting our farmers, supporting our main streets, by coming up with the best, strongest comprehensive policy. So my bill is really a dream of what the opportunities for Wisconsin are, laid out, addressing each of those complicated policy issue areas in this conversation.
Public opinion on this has obviously changed quite a bit over time. And I think, people's personal opinions have really evolved over time, in part due to seeing how it works in other states and, knowing people who benefit one way or another from it. So when you see that overall, public support for some level of legalization, why do you think that hasn't translated to majority coalitions in the legislature?
It is, and this is getting into some other issues, and they could be controversial, but it is what it is. I mean, we have a rampant crime problem in our state, and a lot of that, we have a drug issue problem, we have an opioid issue problem in this state, and it's only getting worse with the open borders, and fentanyl coming in, drugs coming in. I hear it in northern Wisconsin. It's one of the largest problems we have, and I hear it in other parts of the state. And there doesn't seem to be a lot that the administrations, are really shutting this down. So it's like, why would you add another drug into the mix when we have all this rampant drug use and the problems that we do and the overdoses and everything else? And I don't think, I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues, both in the Assembly and the Senate, where it's not about not wanting to help people. It's about the fear of adding to the social issues and the drug abuse issues that we already have in this state. So I think it's going to just be that ongoing educational that we have. We have to keep educating people and showing the difference between what medical marijuana, in my case, what medical marijuana can do to benefit our constituency, and how that overweighs. It's under a doctor's care, just like the opioids are, or just like any other medical drugs that are out there. How that outweighs the challenges that there may have, with the opioids. Medical marijuana is, in my opinion, is not going to lead to more crime problems and issues. In fact, I think there's a lot of ways, and we had the informational hearing on it, where cannabis can be used to actually help people that have opioid addictions, and bringing them off of it. So for me, it's a continued educational process to make sure that people understand that we're not trying to add to the crime problems that are basically destroying a lot of our small rural communities as well as our urban areas around the opioid and fentanyl issues that we currently are suffering from.
So we do know that in Wisconsin, even in just the last decade, that I have really spent a lot of time focusing on this issue, that support of legalization has increased with a very steep incline. And people that have strong opinions about keeping cannabis um, illegal, that number has also decreased at a very steep angle. We are, I believe, at 69%, according to last Marquette Law School poll, of people in Wisconsin, regardless of where it is that they live, supporting taxing and regulating alcohol for responsible adult usage. And for the first time ever in Wisconsin, in poll data, over 50% of Republicans also support that. So certainly Democrats and independents have higher approval ratings, but nationally, it's even a bit higher than that. We have seen this experiment in other states be successful. And I think it is really important that we hear the voices of the people. It is clear that people outside of the Capitol have different opinions than their elected officials. And part of it is, I think, that it hasn't risen to the point of being an electoral issue. Like, this isn't the issue that people are voting on. But I do think that it is rising to that level. As I talk to more and more people, you hear about it during the gubernatorial debates, during presidential debates. Our legislative colleagues are asked about it during their campaigns. So it is becoming one of those issues that people are asking about. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is a very successful industry in the state of Wisconsin already. It just happens to be an illicit industry. And I think it's really important that we bring it above, above the ground, shine some sunshine on it, and make sure that with regulation, we can increase safety of the product that people are having access to. People are already in Wisconsin choosing to drive over the borders to surrounding Midwestern states. I was recently up in northeastern Wisconsin, and it was amazing when as soon as you get to that kind of that billboard alley, I think you all know where I'm talking about, how many of those billboards starts and keep driving. The UP is not far away. You can get legal pot up here, and the same thing is the case along the southern border of Wisconsin with Illinois. The dispensaries in these surrounding states, the license plates on these cars are overwhelmingly Wisconsin license plates. So people are using cannabis. It is something that people have been using in Wisconsin and across our nation for quite some time. This is not a new drug. It's not a new conversation. People would like to have access to safe, predictable products as opposed to buying it through that illicit market. But we have the opportunity to really make a difference in people's lives, as well as increase that safety and security. And that matches up with what people are asking, what we know about through non-binding referendums at the ballot, as well as poll questions here in Wisconsin, as well as nationally.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen, I think you called it an island of prohibition. And it is interesting looking at the map. We're kind of increasingly becoming an outlier. What effects have you noticed in terms of how Wisconsin has responded or changed, or issues that have come up as states around us increasingly? I mean, you can just hop across the border and get it over there.
Some of my border, my district does border the UP greatly. For the majority of my district borders the UP. And our sheriffs have had their challenges with that because they know people are going back and forth. I don't really know that Wisconsin has ever been moved by the argument, well, everyone else is doing it, we should do it too. We're a very independent state. I mean, we see that all the time on issues. And I admire that about Wisconsinites. We march to the beat of our own drum. And again, I just go back to the issue, and that's why I'm championing medical marijuana, because I do believe it's, we were the state that came out with right to try, even before they did it at a federal level. And I know that a lot of people have purchased cannabis illegally because of their loved ones that are suffering, and it's helped them. It's helped them greatly. We have friends where she was diagnosed with MS very late in her life, and it hit her hard. Like within 18 months, she was in a wheelchair. I mean, it was just very debilitating for her. And the drugs, the side effects and everything, I mean, her quality of life was just being stolen. And her husband finally said, you know what, they might put me in jail, whatever. But it's made a difference in her life. She's not in a wheelchair anymore, and she is functioning as a mother again and being able to take care of her family and feel and have some quality of life back. And it all comes back to me. Who are we to say that that's not okay? You know, who are we to take that right away from people? And I know it's greatly used. A lot of cancer patients where they have no appetite, it's helping there. It's helping with a lot of relief. And again, the side effects of the FDA approved drugs are horrific. And I just, I think of our veterans, I think of PTSD. Who are we to take that ability for recovery away from them and allow them not to be able to do with things? So again, I fall back to what I feel is possible. And I think that with a strong framework in the next session or two, I do think medical marijuana will be possible.
So it is in Wisconsin, we have seen a lot, it's challenging in that there are limits on what it is that local governments can do when it comes to cannabis reform and cannabis policy because of our state law. But I have seen, for example, some things that seem small but are actually big. Local police departments that are retiring drug dogs from their task force, or ones that are being replaced because of age, that are not being trained on cannabis detection because partly because of the hemp bill, but also partly because of the fact that people believe that this is a trend that is going to continue, and eventually Wisconsin will be a legal state. We know also that there have been communities across Wisconsin that have taken action to decriminalize cannabis at that local level. Our local governments, in conjunction with their law enforcement officers and business owners, are seeing that this is an important step to be taking so that they have more opportunity to support their communities in a positive manner. So while we continue to have the state laws on the books that we have, and that does make it challenging, for example, for the sheriffs and police officers that Mary was talking about, we are also seeing changes within law enforcement because of the fact that more states and communities have taken proactive steps to address the prohibition of cannabis in Wisconsin. I also think it's really important that we realize that absolutely fentanyl, poisoning, and opioid overdoses are a reality for far too many people. My family, like so many other families in Wisconsin, have been touched by this. I lost a brother to a fentanyl poisoning overdose, and we don't need to do one thing or the other. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I very much believe that we can be a safer state addressing opioid addiction, working with our doctors and our public health departments, addressing fentanyl poisoning on our campuses and within our schools, how it is that we talk to our kids, and we can talk about cannabis legalization at the same time. I don't see them as prohibitive of each other. And in fact, I think that it is really important that we do both of those things for the best outcome in the state.
We've talked a little bit about what's possible and what's a dream, and where you land in between. Honestly, watching the legislature, it has seemed for a lot of years like it's not possible. So how do you get there, and why are you hopeful or optimistic that something might change in the next few years?
So up until a few years ago, there was not a Republican that had introduced legalization. Okay, and we do have a Republican-controlled legislature. And it's starting that conversation with our colleagues, and it's crafting a bill and having input on it with the majority party that where, and I know the bill does not go, I've had great conversations with Melissa, with Senator Erpenbach at the time, and others, that they want this bill to go farther. And I totally respect that. But I also have to go back to what I believe is possible. And once something is on the books, you know, there's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we just keep moving that ball forward as we go. And I know that, you know, we've had conversations with the medical society. Not all doctors want the ability to prescribe. So inside of our legislation, we actually have a 4-hour online course that someone has to take in order to be certified to recommend cannabis. And we didn't do that because they're not certified right now or they're not capable. We did it so that if any physician out there is not comfortable with it, they can just say to their patients or anyone else, we are not certified because this is not something that we want to recommend or have the ability to. And I respect that. Everybody, you know, I don't want to force anybody into doing that because there might be medical professionals out there that don't believe it's a benefit. But the more society comes into tune with it, and as we've talked about this before, more states are getting involved in it. Like Michigan, it was not passed through their legislature. So it wasn't a legislature accepted policy. This was done on a ballot initiative. And as I work with other national groups and we have the conversations around medical marijuana or full recreational, most of the states that have full recreational was done on a ballot initiative. I think it's 33 states now that are medical, and those were laws that were passed by the legislature. I think the time is now coming where there's more knowledge on it. There's more states that have done it. It's more proven, and medical marijuana and the use of it by physicians is becoming more mainstream than it ever has before. So when you have doctors that are saying, yes, it's the right thing to do, yes, we can help people with this. We have a candidate in the 19th Senate District that's running right now, Rachel Cabal-Guevara. She's an advanced nurse practitioner. She 100% supports it because she's more of the like natural products and helping people instead of drugs with just having side effects. You know, Jesse James is coming into the Senate from the Assembly. Jesse's a retired police officer. Well, he's still active, but he was retired chief of police. Jesse supports medical marijuana. So when you start having people in those roles with that kind of respect, who have like, Jesse's lived the enforcement issue, he's talked to people, he knows what it can do. And you have Rachel, who's, you know, in the medical field, has seen the results of it for people, has colleagues in other states where it's being utilized. When you have them testifying to, this is why we should do it, these are the results we can get, this is how we can help people, it starts to carry more weight, so that I do feel it's more possible to be done in the next couple sessions.
So a big part of it is trust and education. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that we continue to arm wrestle with in general with policymaking, is bringing the parties together and building those trusting relationships, but also knowing that there's generations of kids who have been educated in our schools with the DARE program that delivered pretty scary messages about pot, right? Like it's on this list of drugs, including cocaine and heroin and other things that actually cause people to die and are really damaging to the community around them. And at the same time, people are not dying from cannabis. So helping people understand that maybe they were taught non-truths and catch up with science, helping people catch up with what it is, actual facts about what it is happening in states that have legalized, what we can learn from those communities, and go back to what I started at the very beginning, be able to trust one another and know that ultimately people in Wisconsin desperately want us to be able to sit down with one another, have difficult conversations, not feel like their policymakers are saying it's my way or the highway. You have to choose X or Y, but in fact, we can create a hybrid through having sticky, deliberative, thoughtful conversations with each other, but paying attention to what is it that has worked in other communities and other states, and where have there been challenges? How do we weave that together and create the strongest fabric for Wisconsin and for our future?
DARE program. Now you're sending me back to elementary school. That was a thing. So you both talked a little bit about the different kind of the evolution of legislation. You've worked through different drafts of bills. Melissa, you've obviously been doing this a little bit longer, but both of these bills have gone through different iterations, and that's because of the conversations that you have with all these different stakeholders, with people in healthcare, with people in public safety, with people in the business community. I'm wondering if, and you've kind of touched on this a little bit, if you could each just share some of the bigger takeaways that you've had from those conversations that have shaped the way that you approach this policymaking.
Wow. I think the biggest thing is, I was real close to getting the Med Society to give me a thumbs up. But they didn't. They're still cautious on it because their fear is a liability. It's not an FDA approved product. I mean, that's their fear. And I respect that. I mean, and also even my fellow colleagues, like Melissa talked about the science behind it. When we first started having this conversation in our caucus, even in the assembly, then all the books started coming out about where, especially in young people where the brain is not fully developed, all the negative effects that cannabis can have on it. So I don't think anyone, in fact, I know that my colleagues, they're cautious because there's still very much a mixed message out there to, yes, it can do good here, but maybe it's not so good over there. And I think that's just with any other, everything in life, there's balance on that. And there's a real fear, even when we were drafting the legislation, and I know that our veterans want to have a smokable form. And I understand that because that's the fastest way for ingestion. It's the fastest way for effect. And if it's a PTSD event that's happening, it's the fastest way to help them with that. But yet there was a fear of people smoking it in their homes and children being affected by it, so that there was no way that was going to pass. No way. And I heard that in both the Senate and the Assembly because they wanted to make sure that the only person that is getting access to that is the person that it would be recommended for, not children where they could be harmed and other things. So talking to the employer groups, they're very afraid that there's going to be lawsuits against the employer for allowing people, that have a medical marijuana recommendation to be, talk about manufacturing, operating heavy equipment. And so we put the policy in there that if you have a drug use policy because of that our law will not override that. Employers are still in control of their workplace because it's their liability, it's their work comp. They need to protect employees from anything bad that would happen. So they weren't, when we talked to the employers, they weren't against it. They were just cautious on how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my employees? How is this going to affect my bottom line? Can I still provide a safe workplace? So it's having all these conversations, and it's crafting a bill that addresses all of the different concerns that are out there. So that doesn't mean that bill is then the perfect bill, but again, it's a starting place. If we can get something through, we can always amend down sessions after sessions after sessions where when the sky does not fall or there is nothing bad that happens, we can expand on maybe the uses or the medical conditions that are out there. Now, we empowered the Regulatory Commission along with the Medical Examining Board to list more conditions. What we did is just what we put in the bill is we looked at like 7 states and what were the most common things that they all utilize. Now that can always be added to in legislation or it can be subtracted from. And there was at our hearing, there were some conditions out there that I, in all honesty, had never heard of, but it made a lot of sense to add them to. So I think it's listening to the different groups and their fears and concerns, and then trying to make sure that we address those so that going forward, there's not going to be as much opposition, that we can fully regulate and have a controlled product and still get it out there to those that need it the most.
Jesse, can you ask your question again?
Sure. Just wondering what some of the biggest takeaways are from the conversations you've had with stakeholders and every kind of different facet of these conversations and how they've shaped the way that you approach the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the bill that I have introduced over the years is really the People's Bill. People across the state of Wisconsin have risen up. They've shared their stories with me. Some of them have been really in support of moving forward with legalization. Some people are afraid of it. And hearing earnestly what it is that people are saying and doing our very best, and Mary talked about this a bit, to address all of those concerns. People, again, people that have thumbs up about the idea, as well as people who are a little bit scared, making sure that we do have those guardrails in our policy making. And frankly, folks all across Wisconsin reach out to my office. It feels like on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, and share with me why it is that they're glad we are carrying this bill. And some of the conversations start like this. Hey, Senator Agard, I really support your work when it comes to cannabis reform in Wisconsin. I would never vote for you because you're a Democrat, but you're right on when it comes to this policy. I think that it's really important that we, as we're doing policy making, we arm wrestle with what does it mean to be a safer state. That we figure out a way to make sure that we're not picking winners and losers in the policy making, as well as making sure that we are creating a community that people want to stay in. Right in Wisconsin, we want to make sure that our family farms are able to be successful. We want to make sure that our young people grow up and want to put their roots down here. We want to make sure that our main streets are successful and flourishing. We want to make sure that we don't have egregious racial disparities. And well, cannabis legalization isn't the answer to all of these. I do very much believe in my years of research and working with people across Wisconsin, hearing directly from Wisconsinites about what is exciting and concerning about cannabis legalization, that we can create a policy that creates a safer and stronger Wisconsin for everyone. And that really the best way to do that is through full legalization.
Obviously, concerns are going to vary depending on the person that you talk to and what their background is and what they're focused on. But when you're talking to someone who's hesitant to support something like this, what are some of the things that you wish they knew, or common misconceptions that you feel like you kind of have to counter a lot?
Because cannabis is still a Schedule I drug at the federal level, which I have to admit, under this administration, I thought they would take it off being a Schedule I drug. And that is my greatest hope, because I think if that ever happens, then the research, like at the universities and the UW, all that would happen. And I think that would alleviate the fears that are out there. I hear repeatedly it's a gateway drug. I hear repeatedly that it inhibits people's ability to perform and slows them down. It's dangerous. I also hear, the young brains, if they're exposed to it, there's always that, they start smoking pot in high school and then they live in mom's basement for the rest of their life. So those commercials are out there. And I know that my caucus is not ready for full legalization. I would say both caucuses, both the Assembly and the Senate, the majority party is not ready for full legalization. And that is why I am sticking solely to medical marijuana. I firmly believe in the healing properties of it. I firmly believe in the usage of it in the medical field. I've seen a trend in the last 10 to 15 years. A lot of people are turning to more natural type products. In this last legislative go around, we licensed naturopathic doctors, which Governor Evers did sign. We did complementary care people, where there was a lot of different modalities, and Governor Evers did not sign that, which I was a little disappointed. He vetoed that, which we'll be bringing that back. But I see people looking for alternatives to wellness, where they're not comfortable taking a pill anymore. They want to know, why am I sick? What can I change in my life and my lifestyle to keep from becoming a long-term patient or a chronic patient, or constantly, popping pills, and FDA approved or not. So I think cannabis and medical cannabis falls in that realm, where here's an alternative to some of I can't even begin to express. I was living on opioids because of the medication that I was taking, and the side effects are horrific. And I don't know why we forced people to live. When you are under medical duress to begin with, whether it's cancer, whether it's chronic fatigue, chronic pain, MS, why we force you to take drugs with horrific side effects that just add, and then you get on this chain of, okay, so now I'm taking this, so then I got to take this to counteract the side effect, And there's long-lasting side effects. I mean, I have permanent nerve damage because of some of the drugs that I was forced to take because I couldn't take a natural product. And I think that's wrong. As a society, I think that's wrong. And as a party, I think that's wrong. And I think, this, I can't stress enough. This is under a doctor's care. We are not just willy-nilly saying, you have a condition here. You have to see a physician. You have to have a recommendation. And someone needs to explain the mentality to me that a medical professional can give you a drug with side effects, but they can't give you a natural product without the side effects. Please explain that to me.
So as I have been working on this bill, I would say that most people will actually come to me and say, why is it that the Republican Party continues to stand in the way of us being able to pass this legislation? Don't they see what is happening in all of the other states and frankly, other countries like Canada who have taken the steps to legalize cannabis, that the ground isn't falling out, that you're actually able to have conversations with kids about youth usage and really be serious about that. The bill that I have drafted has an age of 21 for access to legal cannabis for responsible adult usage, unless, of course, there's a doctor saying that it would be good for their kids to have access to it. So people, I have the other people coming to me than Mary has coming to her, who continue to scratch their heads and be very confused about the fact that Wisconsin is so behind the eight ball. Yet, despite the fact that the majority of the people in Wisconsin, including now the majority of Republicans in Wisconsin, are in favor of legalizing cannabis. And they would like to know what it is that they can do themselves to help change this policy. I do agree with Mary in that it would be really helpful if the federal government reclassified cannabis on its list of controlled substances. Right now, it's with a bunch of substances that, if you talk to a doctor, they'll say those have no redeeming qualities, and it could be reclassified down lower with substances that do have some health benefits, or they could just remove it completely and have it be regulated on its own in the same way that we regulate alcohol in our country. So we don't need to accept that this is the way it is. And I do very much encourage people to continue sharing their stories about how prohibition has harmed them, and also sharing stories if they've spent time in legal states of what it is, what that community looks like once legalization has taken place. Because again, the ground has not fallen out. And in fact, a lot of people in Wisconsin are taking field trips over the border to make purchases with our hard-earned tax dollars, going to invigorate economies in other states rather than staying away.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left here, so I'll kind of open it up for you two to talk about next steps, what this looks like going forward in the next session, and anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd want to make sure people hear.
So we did have a hearing last spring in the Senate, and it turned into, it was an informational hearing because it was after session, and that was one of the caveats I had to agree to in order to have that hearing, which is fine. But it brought a lot of things to light. There was a lot of input from a lot of people, and we will be bringing the bill back. It might have a few tweaks to it, but it'll be pretty much the same regulatory framework. We might add a condition or two based on what we learned last time and some input from the medical community. But we're just going to keep hammering away with medical. I do think that if something gets done in this session or next session, it's going to be around the medical. Our caucuses are not ready yet to see full legalization. And I will say this, it wasn't all roses for every state when they went to full legal. I mean, Colorado had a lot of hiccups, and it cost them a lot of money. And, when you talk to legislators from that state, there was some bad times with it. Now they might be getting it under control now. Yes, Canada has gone to a full legalization. Canada doesn't have a southern border like we do, where we see the influx of drugs coming through, you know, with just a wide open border and all the harmful things that are coming through. So I think that that does lead a lot of Americans to be cautious, more cautious on the subject, because the damage that they see with those drugs coming across the border, the fentanyl, and just unchecked. I mean, it's affecting us way up in northeastern Wisconsin, you know, right along the Michigan border. So I think that's harmful. And I think that that is working very much against us when it comes to trying to get any cannabis legislation done in the state of Wisconsin, because we do have a lot of people that are like, no, we don't need any more drugs in the state. We just don't. We're already having this opioid battle. We're already having the fentanyl battle. And, you know, we need law enforcement on our side on this one. If the sheriff's departments, if the police chiefs came out and said, we support medical, we support anything like that, that would carry a lot of weight. And so far we have not gotten that. So we're just going to keep up the educational process. We're going to keep working with our colleagues. We're going to keep working with groups like WMC so that the employment community and our employers know that we're still keeping protections in there, so that we're not going to dump a lot of liability on them and put them in the position of creating unsafe workspaces or having them pick up the liability on this, because that's not our intent. Our intent with this bill is to help people who have conditions where cannabis could really aid them. You know, whether it's our veterans with PTSD, other workers that God knows over the last few years have had, you know, EMS workers, our nurses, our medical community, but also people with long-term illnesses, chronic illnesses, where we can see that medical marijuana would give them relief without all the side effects that a lot of the prescription FDA-approved drugs do.
So I, of course, I'm going to continue working very hard for responsible adult usage of cannabis in Wisconsin. And it's been a real learning experience and a real pleasure to be able to meet with so many people from across the state of Wisconsin and hear their stories and lift them up. And what a thrill when Governor Evers included a majority of the work that I've been doing when it comes to legalization in his last state budget, and being able to see even the change of conversation across the state of Wisconsin. 10 years ago, when we put the bill out, a little less than 10 years ago, people would kind of talk behind their hand and insinuate that they liked the things I was working on in the Capitol building. And now you can be on the sidelines of your kid's soccer game or at the grocery store, and people are talking about taking trips to South Beloit to visit dispensaries. And why is it that we can't do that in Wisconsin? When is it gonna be time? I think people here are hungry for this change. It's clear it's an important conversation for us to continue having, and being in touch with what it is that the majority of the people in Wisconsin want, I think is a very important part of my job. And I am hopeful that we can cross this finish line. I very much believe it's not a matter of if cannabis will be legal for adult use in Wisconsin. It's a matter of when and what that looks like. The devil's in the details with these policies. I very much believe that we need to be paying attention to even the smallest details of what it is that legalization looks like. And it's a really exciting topic to be leading on right now in our state and our nation.
Well, thank you both so much for a really thoughtful discussion. Really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who tuned in, who I think we've got a lot of passionate viewers, I'm sure, who were excited to hear this and glad to hear what you guys are working on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. And thanks to the Cap Times.
Yes.